It's episode 245 of View from 202. Red Bull's been cracked. The Red Bull Red Edition has been back.
We finally ended the Red Bull
the boycott, divestment, and sanctions of Austria.
This is why
all of Austrian product.
This is why the state of Texas has made it illegal to do BDS, because it fucking works. All right, and barely. You guys, refunds hadn't even hit the bank yet, and we're here. We're here, baby. No, the four of us were back in person. Sam has made the trek even bravely on the crutches to watch the U.S. Open Cup game over here at Peaches, because we're in a new era, or at least, I don't know, we're no longer in the previous era. Gerhard Struber has mutually agreed to leave the club. This is the second day that
happened yesterday.
Yeah.
Well, we're recording Tuesday night.
We just watched the DC United Open Cup game, and what a sight it was to see the Red Bulls score a goal from the run of play. For all the folks at home, get out your decoder rings and get ready. You can officially reset the tap-in meter at home. We're back to 0-0 games since the tap-in.
We're so back.
I think this is 2 tap-ins on the season.
It's a start.
Yeah, it's a start. But lo and behold, the Troy Lesesne interregnum, or whatever you want to call it, has begun. We're joking around, of course, but
in one game in 2023, Troy Lesesne has won as many games as Gerhard Struber.
That's true. Already matching records. How's it feel, though? How's it feel, guys, to be on the other side of our long national nightmare?
Well, like you were saying, it's very funny that I had requested my season ticket cancellation on Thursday. I had not heard back all day on Friday, and here we are.
Yeah.
I wonder if they're going to do a little more outreach, try to get people to sign back up.
That's a good question. I did tell them that's why I was canceling.
Same here. Yeah, I mentioned Struber and Van Zier, and just even was like, if there's even any sign that there's going to be a change, or even if there is a change, reach back out. But
yeah,
I feel like at that point, I don't even know how many people have canceled. They probably don't have all of that.
You know what's funny?
organized.
They addressed me. I'm sure it's a different person, but in my email they said, "Hey, Brit."
Did they really?
With 2 T's to me.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
What?
How did you not mention this before?
No, I just got this. I got this email today, or yesterday, I think. But funnily enough, yes, the email that I got addressed to me, which at first was coming from myself. I got a "Hey, Brit" with 2 T's.
I'm pretty sure they misspelled my name.
Wow.
Now, I don't think twice about it, because that happens a lot.
Yeah.
But they absolutely just copy pasted my email into yours.
That's funny.
Okay, so now we can infer that nobody canceled in between you and me, because they probably just went to the most recent one. Classic. Well, yeah, so since we last recorded, the club has played. We lost against Philadelphia and just watched the Red Bulls pull out a 1-0 win at MSU against DC. And of course, Gerhard Struber has now finally left the club. Now, the story, or the news that was put out on Monday, was that he has left the club by mutual termination. And the story in the press release, kind of in the quotes given, kind of made it sound like, what was the quote Gerhard said? As everyone knows, or as you can tell, something like that. I've wanted to return to Europe at the end of the season, so we're just going to go ahead and accelerate that. But what was the vibe like at the end of the Philadelphia game? I was not there, but I believe Peaches and Cork, you were both there. The one
I was not either.
You were not there.
Yeah.
Just you.
Yeah.
All
it was
right.
weird.
Did you bring the cup?
I did bring the cup. I brought the cup as an attempt to drain as much free soda out of Red Bull as I could before, I guess, leaving for good, which didn't happen. Or maybe they figured out I was taking too much of a financial burden on their soda machines, where they were like, okay, Struber's got to go. But
these protests are too costly.
It was weird. Well, I got the cup before the racist incident. So this was a pre-racist cup, of course, as we all know.
Sure.
But yeah, after the game, you know, everyone was kind of chanting "Fire Struber" from the South Ward. You know, well, first I went to the game. I went to 101 because they were still protesting, and they were not giving active support. So it was like kind of a chill vibe, you know. Everyone just kind of hanging out, like leaning back on the railing of the safe standing, which was kind of funny. Which was a nice vibe. And then I went to 202 at halftime.
See, you're already in your 30s.
Yeah, exactly.
Already just standing above the fray, not really wanting to mingle too much with the riffraff.
But then I went to 202 in the second half, and it was just filled with like people who had gotten packages, I guess, for Star Wars night.
Wow.
With full families. Like, I
In my former seat? Wow.
I think like 12 kids to an adult level of how the seats were occupied. It was very high pitched up there.
This actually worked?
Yeah, I mean, every Star Wars night has had good attendance. This is my issue with Star Wars night, is that it's very well attended for all
Kids
the
actually
bobbleheads.
like Star Wars?
I think the bobbleheads are probably a good draw in itself. I don't know if it's necessarily the Star Wars night, but there were a few people dressed up to, I don't know. It's like one of those things, and I said this on Twitter, but like these nights, you know, definitely attract people, but not people who are interested in soccer or the Red Bulls.
I think the split screens of like Family Guy with like computer animated mayhem or whatever, I think mixed in with Family Guy is an occasional Baby Yoda clip. So kids these days do,
you know, this is
that Star Wars is relevant to that extent.
I'm about to sell this, you know, the next ad product will just have little, you know, like the 3D ads things that look 3D but are like, you know, flat. We have those, but they're just playing like a Subway Surfer to children, like in their frequency, that in colors that only they can see.
Let's mark the Grand Prix next step.
Yeah, I mean, if he hasn't thought of it yet, you know, you can give me a 15% commission on however that much that costs. But yeah, I was up into 202. It was very, very loud, to the point where I'd convinced Kate and Alex to come down to 101 just because it was like all adults and it was like kind of chill. So we hung out in the back of the section for the rest of the game. But yeah, very, very hostile. To Struber, the feeling. Struber didn't go around the stadium, obviously. I mean, I don't think he is kind of that. He definitely wasn't willing to face any fans of any sort. You know, didn't thank them.
They didn't announce the name on the PA again, right?
Yeah, they didn't announce the name. They announced it once to announce that he got a yellow card during the game.
Right.
When he was screaming at the fourth official for the handball call or whatever. But
that is a funny little detail. That
in retrospect, yeah,
you know, for like a month, the club was just showed that little nugget of detail or like awareness, giving up the game, that they're aware that the manager is just massively unpopular for a month, and that like they couldn't even announce his name without fear of you know, him getting massively booed. Yet we're still keeping him around.
The Steve Keen zone ended up being mercifully short.
Yeah,
but it was a very intense zone for a minute.
I think it leads, and I know that, you know, I've been joking around and started this episode on a light note, but I think, you know, as you may, if you're online, you'll see some of the posts being made along these lines, that this is still not, you know, there's still work to be done to climb this club out of the hole here and kind of rebuild some trust and some standards.
But I will say, like, before we go into that, like, there was a feeling from the supporters that maybe like this was the final straw for some reason. I don't know. It like did feel like that at the stadium. I don't know why, but there was this kind of like feeling in the air, like, oh, maybe this was it. Like there was like, it was weird too, because Omir Fernandez came over to the supporters, but no one else. You know, as like the players kind of like ignored everyone too. So there was like a really weird post-game feeling after Philly.
That's interesting, because I mean, the question I was just about to ask is like, why now? And I don't think anyone has a real answer to that. But the idea of, or like the fact that it felt palpably different in the stadium is interesting to me, because it reminds me of like how in 2019 there were a couple games that I remember at the time thinking like, oh wow, the stadium has turned, this feels different.
That Seattle loss
and the Colorado loss,
I
think in particular, I think was the first one where there was a like Armis out or fire Armis chant, where they didn't put out an all access video or something. And, you know, so everyone just ran into the tunnel immediately. And, you know, kind of as you were saying on Twitter earlier this week, Cork, that a big inspiration of the zone sort of thing wasn't necessarily just that losing sucks, but the idea that it didn't seem to matter, like results and effects didn't really seem to be tied to each other. That was largely born from results like those, being at the stadium, being like, oh, wow, everything's turned, but it doesn't seem like it matters at all. So it's fascinating for me to hear that there was kind of a difference, because it's also kind of like, was there ever any expectation that we were going to win on Saturday? It didn't feel like it.
Not really, but I also think like the average fan is smart enough to be like, intuitively know, because when we got the email, the season ticket holders got the email, it was addressed from both Jochen and Marc de Grand Prix, that the performance wasn't good enough, and everyone obviously knew. It was like, oh yeah, Struber had until Star Wars night to fix it, and if like he fucks up Star Wars night, it's over for him.
Well, if you know, this is just off the press release. I mean, I'm not a reporter now, so I don't have any inside dirt on the situation. So I'm just going off the public press release everyone else is, and that seemed to provide some context clues, as you know, and some not even context clues. There's one moment or one line where Schneider says, you know, specifically after the Philly game, you know, the talks with Gerhardt about leaving got a little more serious. So it, you know, kind of, and also this is a little less savory, obviously, but there was also, you know, kind of got a lot of attention that Schneider also said during the press conference that the Van Zier incident had nothing to do with Struber's dismissal, which I guess we can get into that a little bit later, what that means. But that for this, you know, current point speaks to the fact that, yeah, maybe to some extent, Struber was effectively fired, that eventually results did become untenable. And, you know, even if they were, and this is a whole other ball of wax, but even if they were willing to bring him back for this season, knowing that he didn't want to be here, apparently, they were willing to, you know, let it play out until things got especially bad. And apparently, you know, losing to Philly, which marked one win and 11, 12 games to start the season, turned out to be the straw that broke the camel's back. And that they decided to make a move that, you know, I imagine Struber was, you know, certainly the way it was worded, obviously being a mutual decision, and Struber even being quoted in the exit release and all that stuff implies that, you know, he was allowed to do it largely on his terms, but that Struber had been sort of made aware that there was, you know, kind of a you know, fall line for him to cross where things became, you know, untenable and not worth keeping him around even in this kind of provisional setup until the season ended. So, yeah, that you know, can also makes it interesting timing, but also I suppose it does, if you think it is, like I just laid out, kind of a performance-based decision, then I guess it does kind of tie into the fact that even though the team was, you know, eventually last in the table and not winning any games, you know, the underlying metrics were still somewhat passable. And, you know, the idea seemed to be that, you know, if we can just kind of wait out this, you know, kind of rough period, the team might get a bounce when some of these injuries end and stuff like that. But, you know, whatever calculation that was seemed to have, you know, decided that losing to Philly was, you know, one loss too many, and for that plan to be tenable for the rest of the year, and they decided to make a decision. You know, and again, like, I don't think it was something that Struber was blindsided by, but I also think, you know, if they hadn't lost to Philly, if they hadn't lost, you know, last couple games, he might have been willing to stay around a bit longer. It's all salad, but we don't have to worry about it anymore, I guess, is the best way. Even in leaving the 2023 Struber administration was a very salad-like operation.
I don't doubt to some extent that he probably felt some amount of relief at some point, you know, because
he literally said in the press release that he didn't want to be here, and I can't imagine that mood changed when
Yeah.
The losses piled up and the criticism piled up.
Yeah. And I think on the slightly more sober, critical side of kind of how this shook out, part of me was thinking, is looking at the statement and is thinking, because going into this week, last couple weeks, I've been saying the one of the few things left that could be more humiliating that had not happened yet was if Struber quit and wasn't fired, and just left on his own terms. So now that this has happened, you kind of assume in these cases that like mutual termination is usually not fully mutual. But reading this, I was thinking, oh God, what if it actually was on his own terms? Like that does seem plausible. But it does, yeah, it seems like maybe just the club did reach a conclusion that maybe just at this point he was not going to be able to turn the ship around, even if they were not quite as skeptical of his methods as the fan base and the critics have been. The point about the underlying numbers is interesting too, because I think the XG and the expected goals and expected goal difference numbers are making the rounds, and I think that really, the thing that pops off the sheet about those is that we were shown to technically have the highest amount of expected goal difference in the league, but we're in the bottom of the table. And the thing that was really driving that was our extremely low goals against figure, not our goals for. Our goals for, expected goals for, was middling. It was not very good, which sounds about right to anyone who's watching. I think Eric Friedlander and Cork, you were going back and forth and had some good tweets pointing out just like how these numbers are generated and churned. Like it was a lot of really low chances and then like 1 or 2 chances a game that adds up to about 1.5, maybe 2 expected goals per game. So not really like actual attacking play. Add that up over and then give up almost nothing. And we've talked about on this podcast this season how you can play very tightly, but the high line and high sort of defensive pressure system that we have still leaves you vulnerable to making a mistake or giving up an own goal, which has happened just enough times to make it so we've straight up lost or dropped points. Because it's like when you can't generate any chances, it puts you behind the 8 ball already. And all it takes is, even if you are successfully sniffing out or snuffling out the opponent's play, all it takes is one time for them to be lucky. It's like the old, IRA joke that they sent to the monarchy that, we only have to be lucky one time. You have to be lucky every single time. The Red Bulls had to be lucky every single time the way they were playing, and they were just getting caught out once a match.
That was kind of the overarching issue with, Struber's approach and the way, it was his own diagnosis of some of the worst results of his tenure was that, when one player or a few players, is going at like, 90% instead of 100%, the whole thing falls apart. And that's just not sustainable. It's great, great idea in a vacuum, but when you're actually managing a team and your job is to get results week after week, you can't operate like that. You have to find some sort of, compromise between what your players are capable of and what you want them to do. And he consistently seemed to struggle with that.
Yeah. And I do think also there's the aspect of this firing about Jochen saying that the racism incident had nothing to do with it. That has to be tackled head on, which I think is still massively disappointing. And to the context of, the season ticket stuff they were talking about earlier, I think I'm still probably, I'm not going to uncancel my season ticket largely because of this context around it. That I think the fact that this is now pretty much officially been condoned the way it was happening, now that Jochen Schneider has said that, yeah, we did not find fault in that situation. It's only been performance. Is still unacceptable.
It's a concern for the future that wasn't viewed as a failure of leadership.
Right. Mm-hmm. Great way of putting it as well. And they don't, even if you're going to be super cynical about it and be indifferent to, the literal racism aspect of it, there is the aspect of just not recognizing that it kept his club and his team like in a protracted crisis for like 4 weeks longer than it needed to. Or, you know, I mean, the club's still reeling with the problem. It's not even over yet. So this, if handled by a competent manager, could have been, you know, mitigated or managed in a week or two, even just from a cynical point of view. And the fact that they don't recognize that, or don't even seem to have the acumen to at least lie about it.
Right. There was somebody who, you know, made the point, you know, about that statement where it was like, could have very just easily said, we took everything into account. Like there's, you know, a lot of different things going on, but instead, yeah. Which again, I guess that sort of speaks to the idea that Struber was kind of allowed to stage manage this and do this all on his own terms, all the way up to not having the sporting director say that there were a lot of issues that, you know, led to the club deciding to move on.
Yeah. And, you know, it seems like the protests from the supporters groups might be ending. But it would still be nice if they could apply pressure to see some kind of actionable, you know, whatever steps might be appropriate towards restorative justice, like I think they were doing in line with BPS or BPC, but also, you know, laying out steps from an organizational standpoint on like how to prevent both incidents like this from happening ever, but also how they'll deal with it, you know, in a serious manner moving forward.
Not necessarily a segue, but doesn't Troy Lesesne have some background in that from his time in New Mexico?
Yeah, I was also going to like mention that like one of the things that seems to be reassuring is that Troy himself, at least seems to be, as Eric Friedlander very much said, seems to be a real human being. But
I only now am I realizing that it's the Drive song. But
yeah, the real human being.
Yeah. I just thought it was a good line by Eric until I put that together too. But
yeah, I do think that even though, you know, even it is nice to see that the new manager, and to be clear, he's been named manager for the rest of the year. So,
and Schneider said that there's no search. That they're going to see how he does.
So
after
I guess
like being awkwardly asked like a couple of times,
multiple times.
Yeah, it was like two separate people with during the interview or the Q&A.
I appreciated it. I appreciated that he was like, he is my candidate.
Yeah, the second
is like
time.
Okay, that's like a good.
It's interesting because it's
answer.
like he's not the interim, but it's, you know, it's through the end of the year, so he's still kind of the interim. You know what I mean? I don't know, but he's been given definitely the rest of the year. But I do think that, you know, yes, it's nice that, you know, Lesesne is a step ahead, the extremely low bar set by Struber, but everything that we were saying in weeks previous about there just being no one home structurally to kind of address like, you know, cultural problems and I mean like, you know, corporate culture problems at the club, like that's still all true. The fact that no one was sitting around and like embarrassed by Struber's behavior in the last couple weeks is still a problem, still discouraging. And I think just kind of the longer rot that's been happening with some of the core part of the fan base feeling more disconnected, it's still going to take some work to rebuild. I mean, the results, obviously winning is a cure-all for everything, but I think that's not going to be it. That's not going to be all of it. You know, the club still you know, has a way to go, I think, to rebuilding some of its core competency here. I think demonstrating that there is such a thing as a just baseline set of expectations for the manager is at least establishing the floor somewhere, but it's just a starting point. But we can finally start thinking about the future a little bit, because we really were at the point where it was kind of impossible to think about the future while Struber was still here. And
apparently he wasn't even thinking about the future.
We could even think about the future from the one game we've seen so far, you know?
Yeah.
But it's easy, I think, for us to not harp on for too long the era that has ended.
Yeah, I mean, we already said, I mean, certainly if you listen to this show, you've heard our diagnosis of the Struber tenure.
Yeah, we've already diagnosed this.
plenty of it.
So we've seen a small glimpse, 90 minutes worth of a post-Struber future so far. This was the first of our rounds in the U.S. Open Cup. We just beat DC 1-0 at home, in scare quotes, at Montclair State. And it was Troy Lesesne's first match. Played a rotated squad of names, as you might expect for a 3-game match week, but also an early cup round. Ryan Mara got the start as our cup goalkeeper, but then we also had things like, Sean Nealis was suspended for yellow card accumulation from the last cup run. And we see a name from, years ago in Red Bulls history. Drew Yearwood made a start for the Red Bulls. So that's all to say. A big caveat, of course, on trying to draw too many conclusions because so many changing faces. And it's only been 2 days now that Troy Lesesne's been in charge. But gut check, any sort of reactions, any sort of thoughts you have from this 1-0 win? I got to say, the second half, maybe I'm just really tired, but I was starting to sag there. Yeah, a little bit for a second.
The one disappointing thing is that the injury list seems real. Because now
it's not just a protest.
People just aren't on like the shit list or protesting. It is just a very extensive injury list.
The training was just a gladiator session.
It would have been amazing if Lewis Morgan was just immediately back, but I won't rule it out for Saturday.
Maybe it'd be too obvious.
Right.
Everything's just shortened by like a month, 2 months.
I won't rule it out.
Yeah. But I mean, it was great to have a reason to like get up and watch the team with some excitement. It was interesting to see. I mean, with a weirdly rotated squad, it's kind of hard to like make too much out of it. But Drew seemed to play really far forward in the match, which was very interesting and didn't look too bad up there.
Not at all. And he was involved in the goal we scored, right?
Yeah, he was. He put that outlet pass out.
Yeah,
which was really nice. I mean, we must have shot up that 1-2 chart list after this one game because, we played at least 4 of them, which is at least 4 more than we've played this entire season.
No, I mean, it was kind of uncanny, but it was notable that the team was happy to just kind of play triangles with each other and move through lines with combination. And, as we've kind of harped on throughout the early parts of this season, especially when we're watching the Apple season pass and taking benefit of that, and watching other teams, just even bad teams, do very basic combination and passing play, and seeing that even bad players can make it work once in a while. And you saw some of that in this game. I kind of said on Twitter where it's like, and Lesesne's only, I mean, obviously Lesesne has been on the training pitch and contributing to the way the team's been shaped the last few years, but also he's only been manager, calling the shots himself and setting the team up himself for 2 days. So I doubt it's been a thing where he, taught them how to play, Yago Benito in 48 hours. I think it's just a matter of, I think it very well could have been a thing where he just sort of, I mean, obviously, gave them a structure, but sort of rolled the ball out and said, just go ahead and, play your game and see what happens. We don't have time to really reinvent the wheel here with a midweek cup game and then a derby game a couple days later and all the rotation and everything. So, why don't you guys just go out there and play some soccer? And you know what? It was good enough for a 1-0 win. DC, not the greatest team, even when they're at full strength, and they were a little rotated today. You obviously have to take that into account. But all in all, it was, and like Brit said, the second half was a bit of a lull, even though, like I also said on Twitter, I mean, you could see a lot of substitutions and rotation going on, and kind of the decision seeming to be to play conservative to counteract the personnel gap. But all in all, I mean, yeah, it was a very as positive of a start to what is going to be a semi-permanent coaching tenure as you could imagine. So
It's actually
Yeah.
a soccer game, you know.
Right.
It felt like a soccer game.
Yeah. And, while DC, they're all professionals at the end of the day. And of course, professionals, just by habit, if nothing else, are trying to compete. I have to say, it didn't seem like DC was too
up for it.
crazy that
Apparently,
to go and
apparently
score.
Waza didn't even show up.
Didn't we see a glimpse of him at the end?
Did we? I thought we were saying at the end that the reason we weren't seeing shots of him is because he turned out to not even be there.
No, he was there, but he was very NPC. Like
Wow.
just
Okay.
like hat on, like very like hard to kind of make out.
Very intelligence agency coded.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess this kind of what you're describing with players just sort of relaxing a bit is sort of an element of the fabled dead cat bounce, in general, right? Like
Mhm.
across the board. I think that when people talk about that happening at any club in the world, I think that's a large portion of what's imagined to be happening is sort of the players just sort of relaxing and playing a little bit more loose and trusting their instincts a bit more. We'll still have to see, whether that has any truth to it.
Yeah, I mean, it's in in particular contrast to a manager like Struber, who, as we could both observe and hear from him himself, was extremely demanding of the players and very particular about what he wanted to see, and was very, kind of a micromanager of where guys moved on the pitch. I think it was an overarching criticism of him that we had that he sort of made the game a little too abstract and thought of the players as kind of action figures and didn't really take a lot of the human elements into account. And that's where you saw a lot of the shortcomings. To go from that to just the basic dead cat new manager bounce relaxation like Brit's talking about is an even bigger sort of a jolt for a team that's been with a manager like Struber for 3 years.
Yeah, and during the game, we were kind of idly thinking back to the Carnell era briefly as well, where I was remarking like, hey, man, even if DC scored a goal here now, it's like feels just kind of refreshing to see an actual game with goals happening compared to what we've been seeing the last year or so. And that happened under Carnell. Is that we had a couple games where we had multiple goals scored on us because Armis, for sort of similar but also very different reasons, kind of ended up producing a similar-ish kind of condition where the team was almost never losing by multiple goals. They're kind of squeaking out these kind of indeterminate, ugly games where nobody was really squeaking ahead. So when Carnell took over, we started playing a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more openly, because it was a similar situation where Bradley Carnell didn't have a ton of time to really institute a full system. Also, it was much more in the swing of like pure kind of COVID sports era and just less training capacity, less players being able to come in. But even in that context, you kind of just saw both we were able to score more goals in that sequence and other teams were scoring more on us in turn. That could be something that's happening, that could happen in the next couple weeks, at which point, or in which case, I say, hey, fuck it, let's go for it. Like, because the alternative was rock bottom, as you all know. It's not even like the Armis era. Towards the end of Armis, we were getting, I think, maybe below the playoff line, but there was still a semblance of a case that, like, hey, we haven't bottomed out yet. As you know, we had bottomed out this year. So, hey, even if we end up going back and forth with like these with a couple wild results where a couple of them go against our way, that's not worse than what we were seeing at the beginning of the season. So the possibility that something might actually change and develop is definitely a positive development or a positive possibility alone. So we'll have to see how it shakes out. It will be interesting that the first league game that we get to see is against NYCFC this Saturday.
New manager tradition. That's how we bleed him out.
Yeah, well, and I guess similarly, you're referring to Chris Armis's first game as manager was against NYCFC.
Yeah.
In 2018.
I feel like Struber early on had a City game though too. I feel like you just have to play City a lot as an RBNY manager, I suppose, but it seems to be earlier.
It is an interesting time to be playing them as well, because I think they're doing pretty mediocre. They're above.
They've been losing, haven't they?
They lost last week, but it's clearly not as bad as we are, because as we said a lot last week, literally nobody in the East was as bad as we were. But City, I think, has lost in maybe 2 weeks in a row. They're kind of pretty middle of the table. Might be some pressure feeling over there. And as you may have seen on Twitter, I did see a very interesting omen out in the wild this week, where I was at just kind of this thing that had free lunch provided, and the name tag in front of one of the salads said none other than New York City salad. A hilarious name. Like, what the fuck does that mean? It shouldn't have had its own context. But it got me thinking, is there salad realignment going on here? A massive salad reconfiguration.
I mean, it seemed like the City was getting a heaping helping of Cushing salad last year, but maybe righted the ship this season. But maybe that was a mirage. Maybe it has been salad all the way.
Well, I was going to say,
time.
It sounds like it turned into a wrap for a little bit, and now we're going to deconstruct it a little.
Yeah, exactly. It might have even been a panini for
it's starting to turn into.
But yeah, we're loosening up.
Across the deli bar, we're starting to overreach. It's going back to the salad, though.
It would be a statement. It would be quite the game to win if we did bounce back and win. And it would be nice to have. I mean, honestly, if you're Troy Lesesne, it might be. Is this the best scenario for you if you're a manager coming in a kind of tough situation, and you're not really expected to win? Certainly not in the short term. And you're given a game where if you do win, it will help you achieve potential cult status. But if you lose, probably no one's gonna hold it against him too much. I don't know. I'm wondering if he's thinking about it in those terms.
I thought it was a good line from Schneider in the press conference. I mean, he had his good ones and bad ones, but I thought one of the good ones was that where he was asked why Lesesne, and asked about whether there's going to be a search for a new manager, and he said I've been in football for a long time, and I know that this is how some great coaching careers start. And I think that's true. And yeah, the way you're laying it out, Brit, it seems like a particularly a good runway to start from. And I mean, there's nowhere to go from but up. He can't possibly do any worse results wise than we've seen for the first couple months of this season. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see. There's finally, I mean, it's part of leaving the zone again. I mean, there's finally something to chew on at the New York Red Bulls again.
Yeah. So some brief Troy Lesesne bio. Actually, new fact, just learned. And now if you want to dox me, you can go wild. Although I think I've probably given enough information already. Troy Lesesne, born on the best day of the year, October 27th.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Joins, which is, as real heads will know, that is Subway Day. That is the birthday of the New York subway.
Wow.
And yours truly. So he's already starting off on a good page.
What sign is he then?
Scorpio.
Oh.
Come on. Come on.
Yeah.
Ridiculous. I
had to say it for,
Had a career with largely starting in Charleston, starting at the College of Charleston, and then the Battery as a player, then as an assistant, eventually has been a manager in, is it all USL, or is it still technically dying embers of NASL? I don't know.
It was always USL.
It was always USL for Battery and the Charlotte Independence as well. And then he was hired as an assistant last year by the New York Red Bulls. And I still don't know. It is what the connection was, because he really sticks out on our coaching staff compared to everyone else. It's like, Bernd Eibler also left with Struber, but he came over from Austria. Got brought in a couple video guys from Austria as well. Sakaya obviously was already here, even though he is sort of ambiguously between this the second team and the first team, he was on the bench a couple times and then never appeared again. So Troy Lesesne was, I think, unique in being kind of a new outside presence brought into club, but he was the full manager of New Mexico United before being brought over to the Red Bulls.
I have a theory on how he got roped into Struber's staff.
Yeah.
Here. My thoughts, like, Struber got the job and they were like, okay, Gerhard, you can bring a guy, and he's like, okay, I'll take Barent, and then they brought Barent, and then they're like, okay, you want, if you add another guy, just like find someone local. And my thing is, you just went on like some American soccer coaching list and you sorted by height ascending, and then found
I had to find someone who was shorter than him.
Yeah, exactly. And then that's where he based his coaching.
Also explains why there was a no platform shoes rule in the coaching staff that was mysteriously not applied to him. You know?
No lifts unless you're,
I heard that Gerhard Struber actually tried to hire that German guy we played DSA League with 2 weeks ago, but it was turned down by the miserly MLS office.
But to the extent that we know about Lesesne's work with the Red Bulls the last couple of years, is that he was the set piece coordinator.
Mm-hmm.
If you watched games at RBA, whenever there was a set piece on either end of the field, you would see Struber sit down and Lesesne get up and walk up to the touchline, and
he did
kind
a squat.
of kneeled. Yeah, he had a squat that was pretty distinctive that he would always see. And he, got a lot of credit. I mean, Struber was often very magnanimous about, naming him for games in which the team had some success on set pieces. And even when they didn't work out, you could see some of the mechanics at play of some pretty intricate set piece planning. And, that's kind of, to speak to how he ended up at the club. I think there's a little bit of an element of what I was mentioning a minute ago about how Struber tended to make the game a little too abstract, and that might have all the way, gone down to, going and, pulling up the data sheet probably for USL set pieces and seeing who the best team at USL set pieces was, and hiring their manager to be his assistant. I don't know that was what happened, but I think knowing circumstantially about how this club and how Struber has recruited and what he's valued, I think that could be some of the origin story. But at the very least, that he from that historical context with the club for the last couple of years, that he is somebody who already is very studied up on the most intricate nuts and bolts of how the team plays, and will be able to build on that, hopefully pretty fluently.
Yeah, I think this brings us to a couple questions we received. We did solicit questions for what we're calling a semi-emergency pod, because a little peek behind the curtain here. We were considering maybe even not recording at all this week. So
we had already I was looking forward to not seeing you guys this week.
I can
already,
tell.
Yeah.
So we did solicit questions from our beautiful listenership, and I think we got 4. I think they really come in 2 categories, though, so I'm going to lump 2 of them together here. The first category is sort of about Troy Lesesne himself. So the first one, I think, and I'm going to read both of them, it's from Mark USA Fan. Great name, unless you're Mark DeRosa, in which case you don't. you know that you can't fool me. But if you're not Mark DeRosa, great name, Mark. I personally am a China fan, but respectful rival.
USA close second.
Yeah. This
before you get into this, we have to also cover the China Columbia NYU baseball.
Soccer. It's
soccer. Yeah, it was a soccer.
No, we don't have to. We can
especially now that you stepped on it.
Yeah.
So Mark USA asked, was this move initiated in New York or Austria? And then the second question we have along these lines comes from Nathan Howard, where he asked, was the secession plan regardless? How should we feel about that if so? And Cork, Troy, Charleston, discuss. So, which part do you want to tackle first? I think I can jump into the secession plan aspect, and then Cork, if you want to talk about Charleston, I'll hand it over to you. But I do think it's a worthwhile question to think about, who made this decision at home? Earlier, we alluded kind of vaguely to this problem of feeling like, God, is there anyone at home? Why is there no one who was more embarrassed or spurred to action by the racism incident? I think it's from our vantage point, not, being journalists anymore or ever in my case. I don't know, literally, I don't know. I'm just speculating, to be clear, but I think it's also not a great sign and a continuing source of a lack of confidence that we can't know whether this was initiated in Austria or New York, by the sound of the press conference and the quotes and the press release. Jochen is certainly the one who's stepped up to take sort of responsibility for it and kind of said that the results are not acceptable. And I believe Marc de Grand Prix' signature was also on the letter that went out to Red members. So there's, been the statement of intent kind of coming from New York ostensibly. But as we know, Jochen Schneider, of course, is a Red Bull man himself. So the distinction between Red Bull, Austria, and New York is already so blurry. The concerns that we've had coming into this week still, I think, are relevant, where it's like it still remains unclear who had the authority and who had made the decision to fire Gerhard Struber or mutually terminate Gerhard Struber. And in terms of whether this is the secession plan, regardless, I don't know. I mean, another case where I won't know the firm answer, but the fact that Troy Lesesne was given the job for the rest of the year, it makes sense to me. And I will say, and this isn't an indictment of that decision, but the sense that I get from the way this has developed is that the club doesn't necessarily have the capacity or the desire or ability to do a coaching search. That doesn't mean that like Troy Lesesne's a bad option, but it kind of does align with what we were saying in the last couple of weeks. Sort of like this seems like a club where there isn't a lot of infrastructure capacity for people to do things. Thinking back to, when Thelwell arrived and was saying for a couple months, like, we just got to build out infrastructure and do things. And we were speculating that we had kind of lost the bit that he may have built out or may have atrophied again. The way that this has happened with Struber leaving aligns with an interpretation or a hunch that is kind of the situation with the club, that they're not in a great situation where they can just do an in-house talent search or even just like bring on one or two consultants and be able to guide it. It seems like they're going to have to take their breath and really figure it out. Now, that's not exclusive with the possibility that Troy Lesesne is just a good person to hand the keys to anyway. I think both can be true, that like they genuinely trust Troy Lesesne to some extent. And also the club is not really in a situation where it feels confident doing a hiring search. I don't know if there was a secession plan. I guess my hunch, to answer Nathan's question as well, as my hunch is that there was no secession plan, and that was probably one of the things that made this drag out for so long.
Well, and I think to go back to again the origin story of how Lesesne ended up on the staff in the first place, especially given that he left being the full manager of a club. He was technical director also in New Mexico. Being, the full emperor at a club, leaving that to be an assistant. I think, and knowing now from, being explicitly said in the press release that Struber had been kind of looking for an exit plan. I think when Lesesne was brought on, there was kind of an idea that we need to have somebody on staff who's managed a team before and can be ready to step in for any contingency. Mm-hmm. I don't think they planned on the contingency being, results becoming untenable, but that's the situation that it ended up being.
And it is interesting that, way back when Jesse Marsh joined, Dennis Hamlet was that kind of guy who had experience as a head coach.
Yeah.
And he
probably should have taken over in 18.
Yeah. Exactly. And it was kind of only because of peculiar circumstances that he had been kicked upstairs. Yeah. So maybe that is kind of the playbook that was supposed to be in place or is in place for Red Bull in general.
I mean, presumably if Struber's contract also just ended out, it would have been in the middle of the season too. So,
which also seems like still seems bizarre to me.
Right.
Like, I think the more generous, like giving the benefit of the doubt to them is that like when they signed that contract 3 years ago, they're like, obviously we're not going to get to summer of 2023 before we make a decision.
Yeah.
And
that seems to be
obviously
between
did.
the lines of everything.
Yeah.
So,
Which
again does not reflect well on the club or Red Bull, but is what it is.
Which I think, like, to the responsibility of who was responsible for Gerhard Struber leaving, like when they say mutual agreement, I definitely do think that there's been like some kind of like legal backup in Gerhard Struber's, decision to, whatever negotiation he has for this exit. I feel like there was some leverage on his part to keep this maybe going for 2 weeks or whatever.
Who knows? Yeah. I mean, can't imagine him. They were negotiating over anything huge at this point.
Well, my imagination has it so that he has like one of those contracts that really comes up at the end, but it's like he gets paid out only the last 2 weeks of his contract.
Like a Bobby Bonilla type thing. Mm-hmm. We're going to find out Steve Cohen's still paying Gerhard Struber in 40 years. Cork, have you seen Troy Lesesne on the beach at Charleston any? Has he been at, what's the name of the place Caleb Porter's at, all this salty dog?
The Crazy Crab.
Crazy Crab.
Salty Dogs that's the Disneyland.
Oh, sorry.
Crazy Crabs and Remy's are
the Salty Dog is a real place though?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sick. Yeah.
You've never seen the Salty Dog hoodie?
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't remember.
But yeah, no, it is sad. I mean, apologies to Caleb Porter that we have to retire him as our Low Country punchline reference, because now we have a person who embodies the Low Country flavor to the extent that he actually used to share an office with your favorite podcast host, Ben Cork.
Wow.
And if you want to dox me with my real name or whatever, I mean, go ahead and be a psycho. But I used to work in the front office of the Charleston Battery. Some of the more astute listeners may know that I'm originally from South Carolina. And I crossed paths with Troy in 2014 when he was Mike Anheuser's assistant in Charleston. And we weren't like, best buds or anything, but yeah, shared, we're down the hallway from each other. And it was an interesting time at the club because supposedly the entire premise of Troy's arrival was that he was going to be kind of a operative of the Vancouver Whitecaps, who had become the affiliate, the MLS affiliate for the Battery, and feeding a series of loan players. And the idea was that Troy was going to be sort of the shepherd for these guys and kind of report back to Vancouver and generally just, provide a better infrastructure in Charleston for these players to develop in, because Mike Anheuser, the manager there, had been working largely by himself. Both before and after Troy was his assistant. Obviously, this is almost a decade ago, very different time in USL. Not like USL is flush now, but you can imagine a decade ago, budgets were fairly limited. Main reason that Troy and I were down the hallway from each other was that it was only a 7-person office, in those days. So kind of a different era, but a guy like Troy Lesesne was kind of a glimpse of what the future was going to be in USL, honestly, because like I said, Mike Anheuser, the manager in Charleston, had been working largely by himself, and he, was a fairly kind of old school, training ground whistle manager. When Troy came in, you could definitely see, some of the things that he was responsible for were kind of doing video analysis and providing players with, kind of advice and charts and dossiers to work on. And I don't think that was part of USL culture very much at all before, a generation of coaches that, Lesesne is a part of have started to kind of come into the mix and build out careers in the American soccer scene. So, obviously, like I keep saying, it was a very different time and a different level in American soccer, but he was a consummate professional and, a contributing part. I think obviously, like I said, there was some weird stuff going on with Vancouver at the time, and they ended up not extending the project that had placed him in, with the Battery. So he ended up leaving after one season, but ended up going to Charlotte and taking a job there. But I don't think anybody in Charleston wanted to see him leave. He had become a very integral part of the club, and you could always kind of tell that he had a pretty bright future, and it's just pretty bizarre on top of everything else at this club the last few years that it ends up being Troy Lesesne of all people who is the, I guess, new savior, so to speak.
I need to calm down a little bit because I just learned that I'm 2 degrees of separation from Omar Salgado now.
Right?
I mean, that's pretty big. I've shaken a hand. If that's shaken a hand, that's probably shaken Omar Salgado's hand. Probably even picked him up from the airport.
Yeah, Bruce Grobbelaar too, but we won't get into that.
Oh, that's all right. There was that quote tweet prompt going on like, how many handshakes are you from Hitler? And I feel like that helps me with that one. Bruce, I'm not in the UK. You can't hit me with UK libel laws. But that is helpful to know. It's a small world out here. Maybe
I was gonna say, are we gonna see a RBNY BC tracksuit standing on the sideline soon?
Maybe. I mean, if he wants,
is that your new career? Is that why you retired journalism?
Struber wanted to build out a staff of Austrian guys. If
Austrian bloggers.
If Troy wants the top low country blogger in American soccer, he's right next door.
Watch out! A million Barstool guys just sat up in their chair and don't know why. The hair on their back of the neck just went up. But also, I think your secret weapon for getting doxxed is even your real name isn't your real name. So I think you've got some.
True.
Don't even bother, folks. Second group of questions. So this is another pair of questions that I think are related. First one is from Leo, RBNY Leo 10. Should we have any expectations for the team under Troy? Building off this is a series of questions from Xenopolis saying, during the offseason and preseason, there was lots of discussion about the team reorienting its attack. With such a strong defense, even some additional offensive output catapults the squad up the table. Isn't the personnel good enough to perform better within a new context? So, what say ye?
So there are 2 questions there.
Yeah, but they're both about like potential expectations of this squad.
How do we look forward in the club?
Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, I think the second one's a little bit more about like how the squad is built separate. But I think in terms of expectations, I think it's my expectations shouldn't like be as high as the continuation of a project, say, as it was maybe in the beginning of the season. But I do think it's like very expectable to be in the playoffs at least, right? With the current state, a third of the way through the season, bottom of the East, but still 3 points out of the picture. I wouldn't say that that's like an unreasonable expectation, I think, with the quality of the squad right now. But and to that point, like too, I don't even like even the way I was watching the game today, the US Open Cup, and like have been watching the season. Like I think our team would be good under a great manager, but none of our players necessarily, I feel like, have really good ball IQ, or in terms of their decision making intuitively. So like that's kind of like a mid-level expectation in general, I feel like.
They've been trapped in the cave.
Yeah.
So you gotta let them out.
No, I agree.
Everyone, come on, gather here, get close. Camera, get up close. We're going back to get a home playoff game. Bring back that old Struber expectation. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, I mean, I think building off the question about like what are the expectations for the team under Troy. Last week, I think I was kind of saying, the form and the situation is so bad that at this point, if you bring someone in, it's like there aren't even that much expectation. I think that's still true. I think we can still hope to make the playoffs, but it doesn't and maybe even expect to make the playoffs, given how weak the bottom half of this conference is in particular. That said, I don't think it changes the sort of fundamental feeling for me that this is sort of a lost season already. I think this is house money. You know, Troy's playing with house money here.
With the playoff line so low, I mean, that definitely feels that way.
To go into the roster build question, I think Struber getting out of the way allows us to more kind of directly take on the fact that, despite, and I kind of said this on Twitter, despite the sort of weird consensus that had developed. I used a less friendly term on Twitter, but the weird consensus that developed that the team had a perfect offseason this past year. I mean, I just did not see that at all. I think there's some pretty substantial flaws to the way the team was built over the off season. I mean, obviously let your captain and most veteran defender walk, and not even replacing him with any type of senior signing is a bit of a problem. Obviously, I mean, kind of a third rail here, but at least us on this podcast were kind of fans of Patrick Lamala and thought he was a talent waiting to break out once the whole team structure could get a little more straightened out. So that combined with the fact that you have, obviously some pretty big injuries right now, some younger players who maybe aren't quite ready to be relied on over the course of a whole campaign. I don't think this is worst team in the conference, worst team in the league level squad, but I think it's not as full and built of a squad as, certainly the Shield teams in the last decade were. And I think even compared to 2021 and 2022, this team is a little less rounded and just not really gelling the same way. And a lot of that's due to the injuries, but a lot of it is also just, having some weird holes in different spots. And another thing also is that, not that he was used much last year, but Caden Clark leaving means the team effectively doesn't have a proven number 10 or just any kind of more mobile creative midfielder. Wiki Carmona is getting a little bit back, but still a lot to be shown from him. And the team continues to not really have the sort of creative hub that will help a lot of things in the final third. Mind you, like we said earlier, Drew Yearwood playing a bit more advanced in this cup game against DC was encouraging to see, and he could he and Caceres and Amaya and some of these other midfielders can certainly provide elements that a more traditional 10 does. But I still think depending on what formation, maybe Lesesne wants to, start to get into a groove with, I think the team does need to consider acquiring, in addition to a, veteran center back, I think a central creative midfielder is, going to be pretty key to unlocking a lot of the other parts of the team. But in the meantime, right now, I think a lot of what you guys were just saying is true, where it is just kind of house money for the rest of the year. And I think the team's good enough to get, some interesting house money results, if not necessarily contend, which I don't think was ever really in the cards this year.
I think we're playing with house money, but also all of a sudden, I've had this kind of perspective shift from being a shitty top of the table or a disgraced top of the table team to now looking bright. It's like that bus thing where it's like you're looking at the cliffs versus and now I'm looking at it from the bottom of the table and it's like, oh, the season's not over. We have a lot to play for. We have a US Open Cup run we can go on. Leagues Cup. I was gonna say we can win the Leagues Cup now. Oh my God. All of a sudden a very important tournament to me.
Well, it's like bronze medal winners are always happier than silver medal winners.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So, but what if you win Leagues Cup, that's a CCL spot, right?
I don't know.
So
whatever.
It means bragging rights over all of North America.
It means you get a chance.
We have trophies to play
to get a chance to go to the Club World Cup, because that's what it's all about.
That's all.
It's the key
It's
to
the
all
road
this.
to. It's the road to Neom.
I think, God, yeah, that's where I'm trying to be. The point about the roster, though, I think is well taken. I think one area that became a bit of a positive feedback, or maybe base superstructure feedback loop, if you will, between the roster and the players, is sort of the way that Struber wanted his squad and then instructed the squad meant that our attacking 2 to 3 players were like this battery of strikers who ran so much and kind of ran at the other back line so much, and that's kind of why they only played 55-60 minutes a game max, and the forward play was sort of so distributed across the top 3 or 4 players that there became a lack of sort of protagonism, is a phrase that we had thrown around. I do think that the squad needs a little bit more protagonism. And I think like in a vacuum, like some of these guys on the squad could have had that, but I do wonder if like they may have just gotten into the habit of these roles and playing that the best way probably to inject some protagonism will be to bring in a new player
Who was
that
our
has that.
Who was our last protagonist midfielder?
Kaku.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's been 4 or 5 years, right? So,
Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say,
technically he played a game under Gerhard Struber.
this is true. But I was gonna say a lot of these. I feel like the guys capable of being protagonists are also unfortunately injured right now too.
Well, I think Frankie Amaya, in his brief stint being a little bit further up the field,
beginning of last year.
like has a bit of that to turn. I think like Omir Fernandez was always probably going to be a little bit more of a supporting player, but could provide a little bit more protagonism in a way of just like linking up. I mean, think back to like the end of 2021 when we were saying where he was playing more, and it felt like it was unlocking a cheat code, but we were marking like, look, we love Omir, but he's not like a totally unique kind of player, like I think he just still had enough of basic combination. I feel that way a little bit about Luquinhas as well. I think Luquinhas as one area in a different way, Drew Yearwood are 2 players that we've been getting absolutely nothing out of this season for different reasons. Luquinhas has just been sort of out of form and then hurt, and then Drew's barely played at all. That could provide another element than we've seen at all. Drew has more of the box-to-box kind of rangy capability that we haven't been seeing. Luquinhas, if he gets to play closer to other players, could actually dribble and combine a little bit more than what we were seeing before, which is not at all.
And hit a worldie every so often.
Yeah. I do think, though, that the fastest way to get this squad the next step up is to bring in probably a new creative attacking player. And also, like, there's stories scattered all around world football of just like some of the best transfers are guys who come in and bring in a new mindset with them. Just being like, look, I mean, like people have been saying that about Gabriel Jesus and Zinchenko at Arsenal this year. They both came in from Man City and they just like didn't know any better than to like they
could.
Right. Yeah. Like, and that's kind of Arteta's thing as well.
This is the Tyler Adams theory of 2018.
Yeah, kind of. So I think like that kind of signing, that's the room. That's the way in which I think good signings would help this squad. I do think that said, we can still expect better out of the players we have now. And I do think that Struber's tactics were still forcing us to play less creatively than you would expect.
But yeah, also to that, I think like guys, when we see Drew Yearwood tonight seems a little bit more heroic than other times.
Mm-hmm.
I think when Luquinhas, like you're saying, comes back, or Lewis Morgan, or I'm actually like really looking forward to Serge Ngoma coming back to maybe playing to create chances or something like that. But like there are a lot of players on this team too that we just haven't really seen or been given like consistent chances either. And
it's also just kind of the basic thing. I mean, this is at the root of so much of my discourse, I guess. But without claiming that it's an obvious MLS Cup contender or Shield contender or anything, the premise that this. Yeah, and this goes back through all managers for the last few years, but just like this premise that the Red Bulls have a particularly bad squad or a particularly, useless squad by MLS standards. This is a salary capped league. I mean, every single team in the league has holes and flaws. I think a lot of that is just kind of, just a lot of it is just basic, myopia of, sports fandom, but also just kind of a, victim mindset of just like, oh, well, we would win if we just had good players. It's like you and every other team in
Right.
all of sports. I mean, this is, a team that outside of 3 or 4 players at the top end of the, salary rules, every team in this league is spending the same amount of money and has the same sort of balance to their squad. And, and that's part of why, I think we do. And I think a lot of more people should realize that this, and I think it's why a lot of managers and executives come here, is that it's like, it's a challenge. I mean, both Kevin Thelwell and Gerhard Struber, who were the last, regime to come in, both said that they left, fairly, big shot European careers because MLS is a challenge if you're a football person and want to prove yourself in a league where there's a lot of constraints and a lot of parity. And, it's a league where you actually should be looking at the manager more. And it's interesting too, because there was an Athletic article kind of going around this week by John Mueller that was about how, and mainly it used a lot of kind of, abstract data models to look at how managers, might not matter that much in soccer. But even with that being said, that article was specifically focused on, the top level European leagues. MLS, very much, on paper and very tangibly is a different thing and a different type of league to coach in, a different type of league to compete in. And, managers can really prove themselves. And I think, like we were saying earlier, it's perhaps one of the more enticing opportunities in all of world soccer for a manager to spark their career that Troy Lesesne has here. So it'll be, even at that sort of elemental level, an interesting, future finally again for the New York Red Bulls.
Yeah. Anything to expect on Saturday? Any personnel or anything? Or are we just going in?
I think just roll the ball out again.
Just roll the ball out.
I hope Troy just watches our favorite 4-0 NYCFC games and understands the level of intensity that we just need to just impose on the game.
Yeah.
No, I mean, the last moment that, certainly this group here, all of us were, still pretty gung-ho about Struber, was beating City in the Cup last summer.
Yeah.
And obviously Lesesne was on the ground for that. I mean, he would know the atmosphere and the demands, and it'll be interesting to see.
I'll be there.
Well, he appreciates and respects it just based on the presser that went down and earlier this week. So, I mean, and then also just the result with DC is a reflection of that too. But if we come out with the same energy that we did, at least for the first half of the DC game, I'm pretty optimistic.
I think the only loose end for me here is that one name that hasn't been said much, if at all, this episode is Dante Van Zier. I think, his suspension.
I thought you were going to say Ronald Donkor.
Oh, fuck. I was going to mention Ronald Donkor as well. He is the key to all this. So you got to see him play.
I did. I thought he was a Star Wars character.
I did actually. If you look at my search history, my most recent search is Yuba Diarra, because I had to remind myself that was his name, much to my own shame. I can't believe I forgot about Yuba Diarra.
I saw our Ghanaian player.
Right.
Yeah.
Wikipedia still has Molly on it.
Does it?
Yeah.
That's funny.
Well,
but Van Zier
still in his suspension. He's training with the team despite being suspended. I guess I just bring it up to say that even though, I think we've devoted some time this episode to talk about how firing Struber is a overdue step forward out of the situation, but not a fix for everything. That's still true about Dante Van Zier. He's still serving suspension. And for me, I'm still not eager to see him play for the Red Bulls. We can let this shake out, or we can discuss it more in the weeks to come. But it's not a situation where now Struber's gone, I'm going to be cheering for Dante Van Zier without reservation in a couple weeks. That's not how it works. Still not eager to see him play. Still not really satisfied with how everything went down. And we can hash it out more in coming weeks, but just didn't want to leave that stone unturned for this week, even though it is a relief to see Struber gone. The mess that Struber abetted and exacerbated with his mismanagement still remains at this club, and Dante Van Zier is a living reminder of that. So in the weeks to come, we'll have to sort that out. Hopefully it just doesn't sit there as an open wound forever, but we'll see. Anything else this week?
It was a lot, but I think we got it.
Oh, salad days.
So long.
Mm-hmm.